Carleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has been talking a lot about the middle class lately. In fact, they put a chart in the budget to make a point about the relative incomes of middle class people in order to make an illustration of their incomes and how they have been affected by the last 40 years. And I will be splitting my time with the member for Calgary Signal Hill to make the point further. So the Liberals have put in their budget, on page 9, a chart that demonstrates incomes for middle-class people over the last 4 decades. And they've made the claim that middle-class people have had almost no raise in 4 decades. Now, I thought that can't be possible, because all the data that I studied from the last decade alone had demonstrated incomes had gone up and gone up dramatically. So I filed an ATIP request and asked the Finance Department to provide me with the underlying data that it used to produce this chart showing that middle-class incomes are roughly where they were 40 years ago. And so the question is it possible that the budget, which shows no increase in middle-class incomes over the last 4 decades, and previous Conservative claims that show incomes have risen dramatically in the last 10 years alone, could both be true? And the reality is, they are. Liberals who say there have been no increases in middle-class incomes over 4 decades are basically right. And Conservatives who say middle-class incomes went up dramatically in the last decade alone are also right. How is that possible? So I drilled down into the data, and I got this from Finance Canada, data used in the Liberal budget. And here's what I found. You look back to 1976, which is the starting point of this Liberal chart in the budget, you find that incomes, the median income for a Canadian was $46,300. That was under the first Prime Minister, Trudeau. But in the following 7 years, they dropped by $2,800 down to $43,500. It then took 30 years to recover the incomes lost during the Trudeau era. It wasn't until 2007 when incomes would return to $46,400. Just to recap, in 1976, incomes were about $46,500. They plummeted during the Trudeau government until 1983. And it then took decades to recover the lost income that was suffered as a result of those policies. Now, this data comes right out of the Liberal budget, and it shows the damage to middle-class incomes that resulted from the policies of spiraling debt, rising taxes, and handouts to big corporations. And what do we have now? Spiraling debt, rising taxes, and handouts to big corporations. So the very policies that led to the income declines witnessed in the Liberal budget chart are now being repeated by the son of Pierre Trudeau. But I wanted to study the chart a little further to find out what it would tell us about the most recent Conservative Prime Minister who just left office last November. And according to the Liberal budget, in inflation-adjusted dollars, median incomes grew from $44,700 when he took office to $49,602 in the year that he left office. That is an increase of $5,000 or 11% after inflation. Again, this is according to Liberal budget data. That is the largest increase in median incomes in 40 years. In fact, incomes under our recent Conservative Prime Minister grew more than under Prime Ministers Trudeau, Clark, Turner, Mulroney, Campbell, Chrétien, and Martin combined, according to the Liberal budget data. Among whom did this increase occur? The answer? The biggest increase happened for women. Women in the workforce, working on average 30 hours or more per week, saw their incomes go up after inflation by $5,234 during the leadership of the previous Conservative Prime Minister. That is a 14% increase in incomes after inflation. Now, my colleagues across the way will say, of course, but that's just a long-term demographic trend, and it is nothing unusual. In fact, it is true that female incomes have risen under all governments in the last 4 years, but none come even close to the increases that occurred during the leadership of the previous Conservative Prime Minister. In fact, the growth rate for women's median income was 5 times higher under the most recent Conservative Prime Minister than it was under Pierre Trudeau, and also 5 times higher than it was under Prime Ministers Chrétien and Martin. So this is data that comes out of the Liberal budget. If you want to see it yourself, go to page 11, and you can find the reality of middle-income growth and how it was successfully increased by the previous government. Mr. Speaker, I will be overlaying the Liberal budget chart with a very helpful chronological reminder of which prime ministers were in office when the incomes were earned. And in so doing, we will see which governments have done best to produce results for median income people. How did this happen, Mr. Speaker? During the previous Conservative government, we introduced a number of key tax reductions designed specifically to help the less fortunate and the middle class. According to a report conducted by the independent, nonpartisan Parliamentary Budget Officer, Conservative tax reductions amounted to just over $30 billion per year, and according to the PBO, these tax reductions were disproportionately targeted at low and middle income families. They included the Registered Disability Savings Plan that Jim Flaherty set up to help families give financial independence to their disabled children, tax-free savings accounts, which help people that didn't have a lot of money to buy real estate or RSPs save tax-free into the future, with 2/3 of those who'd maxed out their TFSAs making less than $60,000 a year. We raised the personal exemption to take hundreds of thousands of low-income aspiring workers off the tax rolls so that they could earn more of what they, keep more of what they earned. We brought in the working income tax credit, which accelerates earned income so that people are always better off when they work than they are when they are on welfare. We scaled back unnecessary bureaucratic spending and reduced the size of government as a share of the economy to its lowest level in half a century, which lifted the burden of expensive government off the shoulders of the working poor. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say that according to the most recent data, when our Conservative government was in power, the poverty rate had dropped to its lowest level since it was recorded. This is a government that moved people into the middle class and moved the middle class up. And that is why we will continue to fight for the people who work hard, pay their taxes, and play by the rules, those who are not part of the insider economy, who don't get bailouts and handouts because they can't afford the lobbyists to acquire those bailouts and handouts. Mr. Speaker, we will be on the side of the underdogs, as we have always been. As the data has shown, we have helped them to move up, and we will continue to fight so that they have a fair chance to do so in the future. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for breaking down the truth about the numbers and stats that we're hearing from the Liberal government. Maybe the member could talk a little bit about some of the Liberal promises. They promised to help the middle class. The tax break for the middle class only benefits those that earn the most. They benefits the most those that earn over $100,000 a year. People like parliamentarians will get the highest tax break. But those that earn less than $45,000 a year, earn less than $23 an hour, work full time, they get absolutely nothing from the promise from this government to help the middle class. To help those join the middle class, they get absolutely nothing. So maybe if the member could talk a little bit about how he feels about that proposal about the Liberal government helping the middle class.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, there's no question that the Liberal elites, that the wealthy elites, not just Liberal elites, wealthy elites will do very well under the Liberal tax plan. For example, if you are a member of Parliament earning $150,000 a year, you'll get about $1,000 in tax relief. If you are a working class, blue-collar person earning earning $45,000 a year, you get zero. You get absolutely nothing from the changes that the Liberals have brought in. And if you are a senior who's just downsized and sold your home so that you can turn your real estate wealth into income, the amount of that money you can put into a tax-free savings account has dropped from $10,000 to $5,000 a year, which means low-income seniors who are going to rely on increased tax-free income to pay their bills will have less of it to do so with. So this is a budget designed for the wealthy elite and the rich, despite the rhetoric that we hear from across the way. And I thank the honourable member for giving me an opportunity to say so.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his excellent speech. I want to change the topic a bit. We heard just previously some Liberals talking about broadband internet across the country. I wonder if my colleague could comment on the fact that Liberals seem to be pushing broadband as a universality right, but have broken their promise to provide palliative care in their most recent budget. They promised $3 billion. They're delivering broadband universal right, but are ignoring people who are desperate need of palliative care in the budget.
The member for Carleton.
It's an interesting contrast, and I thank the member for asking about broadband. Recently, TELUS Communications came up with a very innovative idea to expand internet to low-income people by simply putting a slip in the twice-annual child benefit mail-out. On that slip would be a passcode that low-income families could use to sign up online and receive internet for only $10 a month. There'd be no extra cost to taxpayers because that mail-out already goes in the system, and CRA already has the data on who's low income. TELUS would be prepared to cover the cost of giving this ultra-low-cost internet to families who need it most. Rogers has a similar program in place, I might add. And I'm now waiting for the Liberals to agree with this zero-cost solution that will help children who would otherwise not have access to the internet to do their homework to get that chance from a corporate enterprise that's willing to offer it to them for such a low price. So I encourage members of the Liberal Party and the Liberal government to come on side with this proposal so that we can expand the availability of internet to young people who desperately need it to succeed in homework and other projects.
We have time for just a very short question. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Abitibi Bay James Nunavik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank the member for his very clear presentation. I'd like to know, he used to be a government member and he did not address the Indigenous issue. He was part of cabinet in the previous government, and I'd like to have his opinion on the Liberal approach to Indigenous issues, if he sees a big difference between his government's approach and the Liberal government's approach. For example, the $500,000 that was provided for the or rather the $500,000, and it cost $3,000 for one house in the north of my riding. So that doesn't make for very many houses. Does he see a big difference between this government's approach and his former government's approach to Indigenous issues? The Honourable Member for Carleton.
J'aimerais remercier l'honorable
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. I know that he is extremely passionate about this matter, and I appreciate his work on that. First, our government worked to improve the quality of life of our Aboriginal people. We also gave the right to Indigenous people to know how their own money was spent. We introduced a bill on First Nations transparency, financial transparency, and I think that was one of the most important measures to improve the situation in Indigenous communities. That is to give them the right to find out where their own money is going. Thank you.
Debate.